Good evening, everyone. My name is William Roca. I'm the Director of Programs here at Village Preservation. A very warm welcome to all of you for this evening's presentation of Deported from Greenwich Village, the story of Eve Adams across continents with Kelly Gormley. Now, before I formally introduce Kelly, let me just introduce Village Preservation if you are unfamiliar with us and this is your first time joining a program from Village Preservation. We were founded back in 1980, and we work to document, preserve, and celebrate the special cultural, architectural, and historic heritage of Greenwich Village, the East Village, and NoHo. We've helped get landmark designation for more than 1,300 buildings in our neighborhoods, and we host over 80 free programs like this throughout the year. Our programs range from webinars such as this evening's to walking tours, in-person book talks and lectures, museum tours, you name it. If you're interested in learning a little bit more about village preservation in general, I highly recommend you go to our website, villagepreservation.org, learn a little bit more about the advocacy work that we do, all the other great programs that we have coming up. And I especially very much recommend you take a look at our digital resources as well. We have a fantastic image archive of pictures donated by residents over the decades, of pictures that they've taken of people and buildings, all beautifully organized for you to take a look at and explore. But I also very much recommend you take a look at the nearly 20 different digital maps that we have. You can build your own walking tours, learn about all the amazing buildings and people that make up our neighborhoods. Now, we are a member-based organization, so your support of village preservation is absolutely critical to help us continue the work that we do. If you are interested in becoming a member or kindly leaving a donation, please go ahead and scan that QR code that you see on your screen there. But otherwise, head over to villagepreservation.org to learn more. And here's just some images of our upcoming September programs. This evening is our final program for the month of August. So we're very happy for a new month to be coming up. So please definitely check out all those great programs in the month of September. But now it is my great pleasure to introduce Kelly Gormley. She's an award-winning veteran journalist who freelances for national publications, including the Washington Post, Smithsonian Magazine, Women's World, and First for Women. She's a former staff writer for the Pittsburgh Tribune Review and the Associated Press and the Fort Worth Star-Telegram. And before I hand it over to Kelly, if you do have questions for Kelly this evening, go ahead and pop those either into the chat or the Q&A feature, and we'll ask those questions at the latter half of this evening. But for now, Kelly, I hand it over to you. I will disappear into the shadows, but I am here if you need me.
Okay. Well, I want to thank everyone for joining us tonight. I was very honored when I was asked to speak. I'm actually in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, uh, but I absolutely love New York City. And the next time I'm in town to visit New York, it is at the top of my list to go to 129 MacDougal Street in Greenwich Village. Who knows what's there? Anyone? Well, now it's there's a green awning there. It's a popular Italian restaurant called La Lanterna. But back in the 1920s, for a few years, it was a place called Eve's Hangout. And it was started by a very brave woman named Eve Adams. She's right there in this photo. That is her passport photo from 1940. So she was about 49 years old there. She was born in 1891. This in the same building. The author Jonathan Ned Katz, who wrote a fabulous book called The Daring Life and Dangerous Times of Eve Adams, that was a big resource for my article for Smithsonian. Uh, he often eats at La Lanterna, and he said he can just sense, he can picture Eve and her friends there back in the 1920s down in the basement, and apparently the owner has named some drinks after her. So who was Eve Adams? Well, I am the granddaughter of a woman who grew up in Germany in the 1930s, and she was expelled from the Hitler Youth Program, which is the greatest story ever. My grandmother passed away in 2021 at age 99, but I've always had a real fondness for stories about very strong, daring women, and this one is a very remarkable one. Think about how just in the 1990s or so, how difficult it was to be gay. I mean, now not if you're from Greenwich Village, that's always been a very progressive place, but in a lot of areas of the country, people would stay in the closet for years and years. They were afraid, terrified to come out. Thankfully, the world is a lot better and has come a long way, but imagine for a minute, imagine what that would have been like to be something that is not approved by society back in the first couple decades of the 1900s. I can only imagine just how deviantly that was looked at, and yet Eve was open about being a lesbian. I don't know if the average person even knew the word lesbian back then. It was something you could barely say out loud, but Eve was in touch with who she was, and in fact, she even had indicated that she identified as a third sex of sorts. The word non-binary was definitely not part of our vocabulary back then, but she had indicated that she felt like she was neither male nor female. So the closest thing today would be to say she was non-binary, but it took quite a lot of guts for her to be openly gay. Now how did she get here? Well, Eve was uh was a Jewish immigrant from Poland. She was born, now actually I'm probably not going to pronounce this right. It's a very Eastern European sounding name, but her official birth name was Chawa Zlok Zu. I don't know. I would just say I would read it rather than hear me pronounce it, but it begins with a Z. Yeah, she was one of 7 children. She came over to the US in 1912. Now, that was the same year that the RMS Titanic sank into the North Atlantic. That was when Eve was coming over here. At the time, she was just age 21, and she was by herself, which I think showed a lot of gumption to be a woman by herself moving in 1912 across the world. So she at first came to New York City, and in 1924 she started Eve's Hangout, which was officially a tea room. Now we know what else was happening in the 1920s. That was the time of prohibition, which was arguably the greatest political failure in all of human history. It did not work at all. It was what it did was just spark an underground bootlegging industry, and chances are Eve's Hangout was not just a tea room, but women who came probably brought bootlegged alcohol in flasks and put it into their drinks. So you could say this was New York City's first lesbian bar of sorts. Uh, and in such a you know, a compared to our world today, a primitive and intolerant time. Even then, Greenwich Village was just such a bastion of open-mindedness, and author and professor Lillian Faderman, who's called the mother of lesbian history. I interviewed her for this article, and she said it was just a place where you felt like you could be yourself. It was free-spirited, bohemian, and even women who were oriented towards women back then. You know, if they were at Eve's Hangout, they felt like they could make a pass at a woman. They could express an interest in a woman. At the time, because of sodomy laws, it was all but illegal to be that. And in fact, Eve got in a lot of trouble with the law, and we'll get into more of that later. But so so she lived in New York City for several years, and although the details are a bit vague, when she first moved to New York, she got involved with some radical groups, and they were called radical anarchists. Now, the word anarchist literally means like wanting to overthrow the government. I don't know enough details and what it meant in that context to know exactly. My first reaction to that is, well, why would you immigrate to a country and want to overthrow its a government? That's not that doesn't seem like a very wise approach. But whatever it meant, she was a member of some of what were called anarchist groups, very left wing, and she was involved with some writers and editors who were all in that circle. And by within a few years, she was a traveling magazine representative. She represented publications that were, again, they use the word anarchist. I'm not sure exactly what that meant in those times, but it definitely tripped the wires of the FBI. It was just called the Bureau of Investigation at the time. I don't think they had the word FBI yet, but they had flagged her as a troublemaker, an anti-government person, a radical, a revolutionary. But then she also she got in trouble for just being a lesbian, apparently. And it's actually kind of a funny story. She got in trouble for supposedly trying to seduce an undercover policewoman, and that story is covered in the book. And uh it's it's hard to think that I mean, she denied it even happened. It was an undercover policewoman. Supposedly Eve was hitting on her, but even so, it's hard to imagine that it would be illegal at any time to just make a romantic gesture at someone. I mean, if they turn you down and you leave them alone, no harm, no foul. Uh, but yeah, apparently that was considered obscene back then. So she did get in trouble for that. In 1920, yeah, actually 1921, before the Eve's hangout period, she actually moved to Chicago for a while, and she also lived a similar life there. She co-operated a place called the Gray Cottage, which was essentially the Chicago version of Eve's hangout. It attracted the same crowd. And then in 1925, that's when things start getting really interesting. Eve wrote a book called Lesbian Love. Now, it was a very primitive book. It was not it was not by any means with a major publisher. Her initial run had only 150 copies, and the idea was to keep it on the down low and just hand it to people she knew, like a friends of friends, because at the time, with the anti-sodomy laws, some could consider that obscene. I mean, even though we did have the First Amendment in the 1920s, I think it's important to note that it took a long time, and to future generations to really grasp the full meaning of this. And many court cases in the meantime, like, oh well, hey, isn't this a free speech? Why we have free speech, and therefore we should be allowed to write what we want, and to publish what we want. And I think many amendments and laws are like that. It took many generations to become what it is today. But she wrote this book, and it's all transcribed at the end of Jonathan Katz's book, and it is really fascinating. I mean, I'm a fan of that Showtime series, The L Word, which which is pretty much a Showtime, primetime lesbian soap opera of sorts. And Eve Adams's book is the same way. It's just basically it's just it's like just stories about a bunch of women who are lesbians, and it's like little anecdotes about their life, and there's a lot of drama, a lot of relationships, but it reminds me of a 1920s predecessor to the L Word of sorts. And I'll look up on my Kindle here. I have the book up. I'll read you some things from it. Um, well, she starts with a chapter called, let's see, a chapter called Glimpses, and she introduces us to a few of her characters, and it's very colorful. Johnny is tall, broad-shouldered, an oval face, strictly tailored clothes, a drink or two in her. Tenderly, she embraces the little blonde with Madonna eyes and whispers, "Why, Gretchen? You are not angry with me? You seem sad. I did not mean to run off last night and leave you. Why, child, you may have anything I have." Gretchen looked pitiful. It was rumored that at one time Johnny kept 6 women in her apartment and treated them all royally. And now there's Anne. Anne is what you would call a lesbian womanizer. Anne came to our midst not long ago, all the way from the West Coast, left her past behind, and brought all the fire with her. She has striking yellow curls, big brown eyes, a figure that one cannot pass up, and most of all, she has a charming, deep voice, almost masculine, but is able to impersonate 100 other voices. Anne is the magnet, the fire, and wherever she appears, she always leaves behind some victim. She is like a butterfly and is only attracted to virgins. For a short time, she fondles and caresses them. Soon tired, she exits, looking for someone new. Sarah. Just a slip of a girl, Anne's first love here. When Sarah would sit at the piano and play jazz, her thin body would sway to and fro. She always appeared to me like a little rooster with a stretched neck. Sarah loved Anne, loved her passionately, but she had a hard task. There are so many rivals, she once complained bitterly. Sarah loved her so deeply, and her constant fear of losing Anne was so great that she became ill. There was a scene in a little rendezvous tea room late after dinner hour where 6 or 7 girls had gathered. One lone man sat silent in a corner. Whispers and love sonatas could be heard among the group of girls, occasionally laughter. The atmosphere felt heavy. The man was intruding. At closing hours, he finally left. They all as one threw up their hands. Thank God he is gone. May, the proprietress known as Jim, suggested that Sarah play the song she had composed for Anne. They all joined in the request. With the window shut tight, a dim candlelight flickering, and here goes a song. I love to have parties with you. I know it's not right, but I do. Day and night, etc., etc. They all joined in the chorus. The song went on. Jim smiled and the girls roared. She got a kick out of the song. It appealed to her greatly. The song is full of passion and pictures before you. 2 nude girls in ecstasy of love, fondling and kissing each other's breasts, murmuring words of love. Now, I will say that that's a last line. That's about as sexy as it gets. I mean, it really was not I mean, not at all any modern definition of obscenity. I would in reading it, I would describe it as mostly rated PG in nature. It was not by any means like a hardcore sex writing or anything like that. It was pretty much just a story just about a bunch of lesbians, and I think the author's intent was in many ways just to show how they're just like everyone else. I mean, they come in all stripes, all different personalities. They have love affairs. They blow it. They make mistakes. They live. They're happy, they're sad, they're frustrated. I mean, and just to show that they are humans too. So I think that was Eve's intent, and I was especially interested in. Oh, sorry. Sorry, that was I should have turned my phone off. Um, I'm especially interested in her chapter at the end, which appears to be a memoir. Uh, let me let me go back to the table of contents here so I can get to it. Um, okay. Her last chapter is How I Found Myself, and Eve does not explicitly identify herself as the narrator, but it's pretty much implied that it is her story. And her story was that at age 19, which is a very common age, it's college age for women to have their first experience with another woman. That's often an age where they discover themselves. And at the time, she was still in Poland because she was only 19 and she moved here when she was 21. Her story is that she says, I as I was traveling around, I landed one beautiful late summer day in a little country place occupied by a colony of artists. Tired and weary of my travels, I decided to remain in this colony for a while and forget my business, rather my mission. I set out to look around, found a number of summer cottages, all private family dwellings, surrounded by hills and orchards, a swimming pool, lovely avenues, little summer houses. Oh, it looked so different from the rest of the world. I knew I would find peace there. Finally, I was directed to one house called the Oak Villa, which was set in shrubberies and oak trees. I decided to stay there as long as I could. I therefore arranged a plan of my own, suiting my fancy, entirely secluded from the rest, for I was so tired of people and talk with which I had to contend in the business world. I discarded my traveling clothes, put on a pair of overalls and sandals, a cap, and set out for a long walk. I was 19 then, 5 feet tall, proportionally built, and appeared very much like a boy of 14. And as I was entirely to myself, except at meals, the rest of the crowd did not disturb me. My soul was so overfilled with nature and all her beautiful moods that I did not need any diversion from any of the people around me. This is the way my day was spent: a walk in the early afternoon, a dip in the pool in the afternoon, and then lying about in meditative contentment, observing everything about me. I would also occupy my time painting watercolor sketches. Studying Italian for the harmony and the music of Italy was so appealing to my soul. In less reflective moods, I would pick up a newspaper or some current periodical, and in that manner I felt that my day was complete in every way. After summer, I took long walks far into the night alone. So the days passed beautifully, peacefully, harmoniously, not a bit of disturbance. I was overwhelmed with happiness and the joy of living until one evening I arrived at a place full of light, gay laughter, and music where people had gathered to dance. I inquired what it was all about and was told the colony had its yearly costume party given by one of the richer members, and all these people were guests for the evening. I just stopped there for a few moments, curiously observing, and wandered off into the night again. When I reached the Oak Villa, the house was dark, and I tried quietly to find my way in when suddenly I heard a soft woman's voice. Hello, little boy. I turned around, saw this woman sitting in one of the rockers on the porch. Hello, I replied, sorry, my cat, but I am not a boy. Uh, she chuckled and said in a sweet voice, I know you are not a boy, but just a lonely little girl. Won't you sit down on my lap? I did feel a bit lonely that night, and somehow for a long time dreamed of a woman's motherly caresses. I was so tired of my travels and of men. Somehow I associated with men, principally due to my work, and all I met were men, and when I met them socially, they all tried to caress me. I cannot complain and say that they tried to take advantage of me in any way. On the contrary, they were gentle and very comradely in their relationship. They were of a radical type and sincere men. They admired my work and helped me, but to one thing, even a kiss, I could not respond. I did not know why. Something was lacking in my life. So this night I yielded to my stranger. I sat on her lap, looked into her luminous eyes. They were large and of deepest blue, and what a gentle expression. We sat there and talked for a long while. She held me in her arms as one holds a child. I was happy. I forgot all the worldly injuries and struggles. I felt gentle, tender caresses of a woman's hand about me. I was happy. And what happened next? Well, she says it was one of the best nights of her life, and just for the rest of her life, it just that's a memory was just tucked into her heart, and she knew what she was, even though the world would not approve of it. So what ended up happening with this book? Well, I'm sure her readers loved it. But remember how the FBI was already surveilling her because of her anarchist activities, and now she had published a lesbian book, which again, despite the First Amendment, it took many generations for that to give us the freedoms that it should, and because of sodomy laws, a book about lesbian love was considered obscene and illegal. And Eve ended up being deported back to Europe in 1927. They did put her in jail for a while because of her book, because of her book and because of her alleged past at an undercover policewoman. Hold on, I'm just scrolling down my screen here so I can find this section uh, in my article. Uh, let's see. Yep. Okay. So okay. Yes, she was arrested and jailed in 1926 for publishing Lesbian Love because it was considered obscene in the eyes of the law. They was also found guilty of disorderly conduct for supposedly trying to seduce an undercover policewoman named Margaret Leonard, who'd been assigned to entrap her. Her sentence was 6 months at a women's penitentiary. Um, uh, and during that time, the authorities considered whether Eve Adams should be shipped back to Poland upon her release from a prison. And so later in 1926, at a deportation hearing, Adams was defending herself, and she said she hadn't done anything wrong. And remember how I said earlier, her book really, I said it was like an L-word lesbian soap opera. It was really, yeah, just kind of a soap opera like story about a bunch of people who happen to be lesbians, and she was just showing them as regular people with regular feelings, regular lives. And I love what she said in her testimony with a judge. She said, "I can't see why I should be singled out and sentenced to imprisonment for writing my book, which was only meant to show the humorous side of life, the serious side of life and tragedy all in one." Well, unfortunately, um, she, as much as she protested and pleaded to remain in the US, she was deported back to Europe in December 1927. Now in retrospect, a fatal mistake she made, and we're not really sure why she made this mistake, but even though she had indicated at some point that she intended to seek American citizenship, she uh, did not follow through with that. Now, if she would have been an American citizen, it would have been a lot harder for them to deport her, right? So I don't know why she didn't do it. She just felt like it wasn't necessary or it wasn't a high priority, and sadly, it ended up costing Eve Adams her life. So, but not right away. She initially went back to Europe in 1927, and she spent more than a decade rebuilding her life, and she had a pretty good life. She was working as a journalist like me, and she lived in Paris in the 30s. And in 1933, well, what catastrophic world event happened in 1933? Well, Hitler became Chancellor of Germany, and we all know that it did not end well. But something special happened in Eve's life that year. She met a woman named Hella Olstein. Hella is a Jewish singer who performed at cabarets. Now, the the exact nature of their relationship was never explicitly defined, but it it's kind of funny because in the lesbian world we have this a joke about U-hauling. Supposedly, what a the joke is, what do lesbians bring on a second date? A U-Haul, because they're moving in together. The relationships tend to move quickly, and that's what that's all about. And indeed, Eve Adams and Ella moved in together pretty quickly, soon after meeting each other. But it's not exactly clear what their relationship was, because Hella was apparently at least bisexual, and maybe even straight. She married a man and became Hella Olstein Soldner, and yet Eve Adams continued to live with them. So it appears that they were more than friends. Who knows exactly what it was, but Hella was Eve's person, and I think Eve was also Hella's person deep down. So meanwhile, as these two women become a part of each other's lives, very dark things are happening in Europe. Both Eve and Hella are Jewish, and being, well, at least in Eve's case, being a lesbian, that's an extra strike against her with the evil Nazis who would harass lesbians and gay men. And obviously anyone who was in Jewish was in grave danger in Europe in the 1930s. And then as the horrors of the Hitler regime in Nazi Germany continued on in the 1930s, it culminated within September 1939, Hitler invades Poland, and thus starts World War II. And initially, Eve, I imagine, using that same gumption and determination that's brought her from a Poland to America in 1912 as a 21-year-old woman by herself, the same gumption that gave her the courage to be an open lesbian in a time when many people didn't even know what that was. I think she was very crafty and very determined to evade arrest by the Nazis, and even though they were in Nazi occupied France, she and Hella remained uh hidden from the Nazis through for 3 years after the start of World War II. They evaded arrest, even though there were mass deportations, so many people being taken to a concentration camps. But one day, on December 7th, 1943, exactly 2 years after the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor and brought the United States into the war, the Nazi authorities arrested Eve Adams and Hella Olstein. 5 days later, they arrived at the Drancy internment camp outside of Paris. This was not actually Auschwitz. This was a temporary way station for people who were on their way to the concentration camp. And the conditions at the Drancy internment camp were just terrible. It was crowded, unsanitary conditions. They were hungry. And then on December 17th, Eve and Ella joined about 848 other Jewish prisoners on a transport. It was called in German the Judenwagen. They were bound for Auschwitz concentration camp in Nazi occupied Poland. So what a heartbreaking homecoming for Eve Adams, isn't it? She ended up back in her native Poland, but although we do not know the exact circumstances of her death, we do think that they were probably gassed to death shortly after their arrival in Auschwitz. And so there is no grave you can visit to remember Eve Adams. The grounds of Auschwitz are where she, her girlfriend, and thousands other perished. And it's a profoundly heartbreaking story, but it's also it's also a very inspiring one. You know, there's this phrase that you may have seen like on a social media meme, that well-behaved women seldom make history. And it's true. I mean, Eve was not exactly a well-behaved woman. I mean, she was naughty. She was gutsy. She was working in an anarchist group. She wrote a book that was for forbidden. I mean, she had guts, and she made history. Uh, and unfortunately, ultimately, it was not her being a lesbian or her being a rebel, but it was simply her being Jewish that ended her life under Nazi rule. So now the story continues after her death. For this story, I I got to interview a descendant of hers. Now Eve never had children, but remember I said she was one of seven children, and her younger brother, again, this is a name I can't pronounce very well. It looks like Yerachmiel, her younger brother. He moved to Israel in the early part of the 20th century. So even though five of his six siblings were murdered by the Nazis, he escaped that because he got to Israel, Palestine, before all of that happened. And for some reason throughout his life, he maintained a very steadfast belief that somewhere out there his older sister Eve was still alive, even though presumably he knew about his other siblings who had been killed. Maybe it was because of Eve's feistiness, her gumption. Maybe that he thought, somehow, some way she found a way to get around this and to escape. He thought maybe she had escaped to Spain, which was not under Nazi rule. And he told his a grandson, a man named Iran Zahavi, and he lives in Israel. I got to interview him for the story, and he might even be here right now in the Zoom, but it's the middle of the night over there. Uh, but he told his a grandson, listen, you find out what happened to your great aunt Eve. I mean, you know, I don't know if he thought when he passed away she was still alive then, but he thought she had survived the war, and the last postcard he got from her was in 1940. But as we know, she did not survive the war. But what an amazing story about an amazing woman. And like I said, the next time I'm in New York City, I'm going straight to that Italian restaurant. I'm going to order anything named after Eve. I'm going to go down into the basement and just remember this woman who created a safe gathering space for people who were not safe in the most fitting place in the country to do something like that, which is Greenwich Village. And that is all I have offhand. I think now I can open it up to questions.
Thank you so much, Kelly. So yeah, folks, please go ahead and submit your questions in the chat or the Q&A. And actually, from what I was seeing, it looks like we have a couple of cousins from Eve in the audience this
Oh,
evening.
wonderful. Thank you all so much for joining us. If you're in Israel, that I really appreciate you getting out of bed at this hour. Uh,
All right. So, just a couple of questions for myself, and then we'll head over to the audience. But when was the first time you heard about Eve? Because I did forget to mention when I introduced you, you wrote that fabulous
yes,
article that
thank
was
you.
recently published in Smithsonian Magazine. So, folks, please go and take a look at that. I'll try to find the link and drop that into the chat in a second. But when was the first time you ever heard about Eve and you decided that you wanted to pursue this story?
Well, I've been writing for the Smithsonian History page for a few years. It is a top publication. It's very competitive. Even once you're in, you're only a small percentage of a pitches usually turn it into a story. It's the finest publication. And so I'm just so honored to write for them. But you typically have to swing the bat many times to get an assignment. And one area I've had a lot of success with is looking for specific themed ideas based on months. And so I've written several Black history stories, and women's history stories in February and March, and then June is for Pride Month. And last year I wrote a story about a woman named Lisa Ben, kind of similar to this in a way, in that she started the first ever women's lesbian magazine back in the 1940s, and it was hand typed and distributed to just a handful of people. But there was another very bold woman, and so I was specifically looking for story ideas about pride history. And as a journalist, you always want to go beyond the obvious. And one thing a favorite mentor of mine taught me is that you need to zig where others zag. And so, famous examples of historical events that surrounding Pride would be, say, the Stonewall incident. But it's been written about a lot. So if you want to write about Stonewall, you'd have to come up with a new angle. And so I said, why don't I do a little bit of research on raids on gay bars that happen that may not be as well known. And so I did some research, mostly focusing on New York City and San Francisco, because that seems like where you're most likely to find something like that. And so I was just like looking up history of gay bars in New York City, maybe, and that's when I came to a history page, and I made note of some raids that hadn't been covered a lot and sounded very interesting. And then and Eve Adams' story was one of the ones I chose, even though there wasn't a raid. I just read that it was this Jewish immigrant who started this, and that she later died in the Holocaust, and that struck me as very profound. So I pitched it to my editor, and I was happy she accepted that.
Yeah, and can you tell us then a little bit about your research process? Because it is like a different take, taking it a look at as a journalist into doing the research,
Yeah.
and you interviewed folks, and as like
Yeah.
before we even joined the Zoom, you talked about that. Unfortunately, for these kind of historic characters, we can't interview them in
Right.
person. So yeah, tell us a little bit about your process in discovering Eve's story and putting it together for your article.
Well, I want to give a credit where a credit's due. Jonathan Ned Katz, an author who lives in Greenwich Village. He did a lot of the research for me. See, so someone who writes a book does the majority of the research, and then what a journalist often does is they'll write an article, which is a lot shorter than a book, and they'll use the book as a resource, and often interview the author. But um, writing a history story, it's like a virtual archaeological dig in many ways, and it's really a lot of fun, some of the things you find. And I've often told people that the farther back you go, the harder it is to verify something. And 100 years from now, it'll be pretty easy for people to do research on us, because we're all over the internet. But now, when we're talking about history, long before the internet, the absolute gold mine is finding a firsthand quote, a primary source. And you often find that through letters, handwritten letters. That's in the book I wrote about the Civil War, called Cease Firing: Life and Death at the Swope Manor. There are quite a few letters from the soldier that I write about, and he tells it in his own words. And then in a case like this, in an article for Smithsonian, I often find quotes from very old newspaper articles that might have been transcribed online. Or like there's often something in the National Archives where you can get a quote, like maybe there's a newspaper they've preserved there. But a lot of Googling, a lot of treasure hunting. And Lillian Faderman was very helpful too. She knows a great deal about lesbian history. So and then I the you know a question we always have is, are there any descendants. And I believe I read this in Kat's book. This is where he got a lot of the photos from Eve's descendants. So I asked Katz for the contact info, and he put me in touch with Eve's great nephew, and also some descendants of Hellas who live in Switzerland, and they sent me some photos.
That's awesome. All right, so now here's a couple of other questions from the audience. First, can you just repeat the address of Eve's Hangout on
Yes.
MacDougal Street?
Yes, it's 129 MacDougal Street. And the restaurant is called La Lanterna. It has a green awning.
All right, and just so everyone knows, La Lanterna was actually a village awardee this year, so they have been recognized for all their great work. All right. Do you know if there's any documentaries that have been done about Eve Adams?
That is a good question. And that's another thing I researched. I do know there was a stage play made about her, and I believe it ran in New York City. I was not able to connect with the playwright, but somebody wrote a stage version of her life, and I think it would be a fascinating play to resurrect. As far as a documentary, I did find some filmmakers who were actually working on one, but the project ended up being aborted for some reason. So it's not in the works. They were working on it though. I would love to see an like like maybe a History Channel movie about this.
Oh, absolutely.
I think, yeah, I think it's a fascinating story.
Right, and then we have another question. Does Eve's book have any connection to the 1923 play God of Vengeance that was censored on Broadway because of the inclusion of a lesbian kiss?
Not that I know of. What year was that? 1923?
1923.
Well, I think her book, I mean that's around the time of her book. Her book came out in 1925. I'm not aware of any connection.
Now, what year again did Eve emigrate to the US? And did she, in your research, did you discover, did she ever write anywhere or note why she decided to emigrate from Poland to the United States?
That's a good question. I would need to review some chapters of Katz's book. And by the way, I recommend everyone listening buy Katz's book. It's the most complete account of Eve's life you can find. My guess would be that it was I mean, again, obviously America in 1912 was not what it is today, but to the rest of the world, it's always appeared like a beacon of freedom. And I think she wanted a new life. She wanted to be in a free land of opportunity. There was massive immigration going on, and she came over in 1912. I find that date very easy to remember because I'm a Titanic buff. That was the year April 14th when the ship sank, and Eve most likely came over the Atlantic in an ocean liner like that. I mean, that's they weren't traveling by air then, so she must have come over on a boat.
And when you were doing your research on Eve, was there a certain bit of her book, Lesbian Love, or just an anecdote of her life that really touched you or that you really found just absolutely fascinating?
Oh, there are so many anecdotes, and again, I think one thing I can really that really touched me was that chapter she wrote about how she found herself, and I think it's entirely possible that even though we presume she's the narrator, she may have embellished some details. I mean, we don't know if it's entirely non-fictional, but I think it was very well written, and it was a very beautiful account of a very young woman just discovering who she is. But this isn't so much an anecdote, but one thing that just chilled me and just it. I just found it so powerful. As a writer, I know sometimes the simplest things and the simplest statements can be the most profound. I learned that when Eve and her companion Hella were loaded onto the Judenwagen to go to Auschwitz. Eve's number was 847 and Ella's was 715. It's it's not an anecdote, it's just a number. And yet somehow labeling human beings with a number like they're livestock, that just chilled me to the bone. Um, and yeah, I thought her, her testimony with the court was a very smart, where she's saying, "Hey guys, why are you coming after me? I simply wrote a book about people's lives."
And then, for question of the evening, as you were doing your research and discovering the story of Eve, and as you mentioned, you kind of discovered Eve from doing research on another story. Has this journey helped spring any other potential fresh ideas that you're interested in pursuing as you researched Eve's life?
Oh, I'm always on the lookout for stories. And people often say to me, "How do you come up with your story ideas?" And the best explanation I can give is that I just live. I just live my life, and I watch and listen and observe, and ideas are everywhere. And I'm always looking for new story ideas to pitch to either Smithsonian or history.com. And I also want to write more books. So next year I'll definitely be looking for another pride theme history story to pitch for the month of June. So if anyone has any ideas, feel free to look me up and email me.
Well, Kelly, thank you so much for your presentation this evening and for bringing Eve's story to national attention at the Smithsonian Magazine. It's an important story from then and for today, so we very much appreciate you digging up and bringing that story to light. I see a couple of questions about Jonathan Ned Katz's book. We
Yes,
will send a follow-up email and
yes,
we'll include the information for his book there as well, so you can take a look and include the link to Kelly's article, so you can
yep.
also go ahead and check that out as well. You
Thank you, and
also
and and thank you to the family members who came. That's we really appreciate that.
Absolutely. So Kelly, a very big thank you again for your wonderful presentation. And thank you to our wonderful audience for joining us this evening.
Thank you
It
so much.
was good to have
I love
everyone.
doing things like this, and I'll be looking for more Greenwich Village ideas. So I can
That would
speak
be
again.
awesome. We would
Yeah,
love to have you
yeah,
back.
and next time I come to New York City, if any of you locals want to meet at Lanterna, we'll have a gathering there. We'll have 1920 styles cups, and have have a little a speakeasy reunion.
And a toast to Eve. That would be fabulous.
Absolutely.
Right. Well, thank you so much, everyone. I
Thank
wish you
you.
all a wonderful evening. Take care, everyone.
All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.